The story begins on a quiet morning in Los Angeles. The city was alive as always. Cars rushing down wide streets, people walking with coffee cups in their hands, each lost in their own plans. But inside a modest house on the hills, Sandra Bullock sat alone by the window. She looked outside, not at the view, but at her own reflection on the glass. She was thinking about choices, about chances, about how a single decision in the past could change the path of an entire life. She whispered to herself, "What if I had said yes?" For many people, Sandra was already a star. She had given the world films that made them laugh, cry, and believe in love again. But few knew that years ago, when The Matrix was still just a strange script circulating in Hollywood, her name had been on the list of actors. The role of Trinity, the mysterious and powerful woman who would one day define action cinema, had once been offered to her, and she had turned it down. Now, as the years stretched behind her, she wondered if that decision was her greatest mistake or a quiet blessing that had shaped her life in ways unseen. The memory came back sharp and clear. It was late at night, a pile of scripts stacked on her table. She had just finished a long day on another set. Her eyes were tired, but she kept reading. The Matrix script felt strange, confusing, even heavy. The world it described was dark. Machines ruling over humans, minds trapped in illusions. At that moment, she had not seen the vision. She had not felt the spark. She told her agent, "I don't think this is for me." The script was placed back in the pile, almost forgotten. But time has a way of turning forgotten things into haunting echoes. As she looked back now, she remembered how the movie exploded into the world years later. Audiences everywhere were shocked, amazed, inspired. Keanu Reeves became Neo, Carrie-Anne Moss became Trinity, and cinema itself was changed. Sandra watched from the sidelines, clapping for her friends, smiling in interviews, pretending it was all fine. But inside, a quiet voice always asked, "What if it had been you?" But life is never that simple. Behind her decision was not arrogance, not carelessness, but a kind of humility. She had wanted to take roles that felt human, that touched the heart rather than just the eyes. She had always believed in kindness first, in connection before spectacle. Still, she could not deny the pang of regret. It came when strangers told her, "You would have been perfect in that film." It came when young actors said, "That role changed my life. It inspired me." It came in the silence of her own nights. When she replayed the crossroads in her mind, what she did not know was that this regret was also the seed of resilience. Instead of drowning in envy, she used that moment to push herself deeper into her own craft. She promised herself to take roles that mattered, roles that carried her truth. Films like Hope Floats and Crash became her voice. She built a career not of flashy choices but of sincere ones. And still, in the back of her mind, The Matrix remained like a locked door she had never opened. Then something unexpected happened. Years later, at a private event in Los Angeles, she crossed paths with Keanu Reeves once again. Their friendship had always been warm, rooted in respect and quiet humor. They shared a history, moments on set, unspoken trust. Keanu looked at her with his calm eyes, the kind that seemed to hold both sadness and wisdom. He said softly, "You know, Sandra, they once thought about you for The Matrix. I always wondered what that world would have looked like if you had been there." His words were not heavy, not judgmental, but kind. Yet they pierced her heart like a gentle arrow. Sandra smiled, but her throat tightened. She did not know what to say. Keanu had given his life to that role, had carried it with humility and grace. Carrie-Anne Moss had embodied Trinity with such strength and soul. Sandra could never take that away from them. But in that moment, she also felt something shift. It was not regret anymore, it was acceptance. Sometimes the roles we do not take are as important as the ones we do. Sometimes the kindness of saying no creates space for someone else to shine. That night, as she drove home under the glowing city lights, Sandra felt both fragile and strong. Fragile because she knew she had missed something huge. Strong because she realized she had built her own story, one that was just as important. The Matrix was not hers, but her life had still touched millions. And maybe, just maybe, the path she chose was the one meant for her all along. But destiny has a strange way of circling back. What Sandra did not know yet was that this old decision, this quiet regret, would return to her in ways she never imagined. It would bring her face to face with her own fears, her own resilience, and her own capacity for kindness. Because sometimes the past does not stay buried. Sometimes it comes back to ask you one more question. Are you ready now? The following weeks after her conversation with Keanu left Sandra restless. She tried to distract herself with work, with friends, with the quiet comfort of her home. But his words echoed again and again. I always wondered what that world would have looked like if you had been there. It was not an accusation. It was not even regret. It was simply a reminder that sometimes life leaves doors half open, and the mind cannot stop wondering what might have been on the other side. One evening, she received an invitation to a small film discussion panel in Los Angeles. It was an intimate gathering of actors, writers, and directors, not one of those glittering red carpet events, but a quiet circle of people who cared about the art itself. Sandra almost declined. Her heart felt heavy. Her thoughts were tangled. But something inside told her she should go. Maybe she was searching for answers. Maybe she was searching for peace. When she arrived, the room was already alive with conversation. Laughter mixed with thoughtful silence, voices of creators who had seen both triumph and rejection. She sat in the back at first, listening more than speaking. And then, during a discussion about roles that actors had once rejected, a young director asked her directly, Sandra, is there a role you turned down that still lingers with you? The question struck her like lightning. The room grew quiet. All eyes turned toward her. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to brush it off with a joke, to protect herself with humor the way she often did. But another part of her, a deeper and more vulnerable part, felt the weight of honesty pressing on her chest. She took a slow breath and whispered, Yes, I once turned down The Matrix. The silence deepened. Some people gasped softly. Others leaned closer, curious. Sandra's eyes grew moist, but she did not look away. She told them how the script had felt strange to her, how she had not understood its vision, how she had chosen to step aside. Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking, because the truth was not shameful. It was human. When she finished, there was no judgment in the room. Instead, there was quiet respect. One of the writers nodded and said gently, That choice made space for someone else to shine. That is not failure. That is grace. Another actor added, We all have scripts we said no to, but what matters is what we did with the ones we said yes to. Their words wrapped around Sandra like a warm blanket. For the first time, she felt that maybe her decision had not been a mistake. Maybe it was part of a larger story, a web of choices where everyone's journey mattered. But the night did not end there. As the discussion closed, a young actress approached her. She could not have been more than 25. Her eyes were bright, full of hope and nervous energy. She told Sandra softly, I just want you to know your roles inspired me to believe I could do this. When I watched you in Hope Floats, I saw myself. I felt less alone. So even if you turned down The Matrix, you gave me something more important. You gave me courage. Sandra's heart ached and her eyes filled with tears. She realized in that moment that what we give to others is not measured by fame or success, but by the quiet ways we touch their lives. Still, as she drove home, the questions did not vanish. Instead, they grew sharper. What if life gave her one more chance, not to play Trinity, but to face the kind of challenge she had once walked away from? Could she say yes now? Could she face the fear of not understanding, the fear of failing, and still step forward with resilience? These thoughts kept her awake at night. They filled her dreams with shifting images of doors opening and closing, of paths splitting into endless roads. Days later, she received a phone call that would change everything. It was from an independent filmmaker, someone she had never worked with before. His voice was calm but urgent. He said, Sandra, I wrote a script years ago, inspired by The Matrix, but also very different. It is about choice, about illusion, about kindness in a cruel world. I always dreamed you would play the lead. I know it is unexpected, but would you read it? Her breath caught. It felt like the universe was whispering directly to her, offering her a chance to face what she had once avoided. She agreed to read it. That night, she sat again at her table, just like all those years ago. The script in her hands was heavy with meaning. As she read, her heart raced. The story was strange, complex, layered with ideas that bent the mind. But unlike before, she did not close herself off. She leaned into the confusion. She let the mystery pull her deeper. And slowly, she began to see the truth. It was not about machines or codes. It was about humanity, about how people can lose themselves in false worlds, and how kindness can pull them back into reality. By the time she finished, her hands were trembling. She whispered, "This is my second chance," but the path forward would not be simple. Taking the role meant stepping into unknown waters again. It meant risking criticism, risking failure. It meant opening herself to a kind of vulnerability she had long hidden behind smiles and laughter. Yet she also felt something she had not felt in years. Courage. The kind of courage that grows not from pride, but from humility. The courage to say, "I may fail, but I will still try." The next morning, she called the director and said softly, "Yes, I will do it." Her voice shook, but it carried a quiet strength. On the other end of the line, the man sighed with relief. He said, "Thank you, Sandra. I believe this story will not only change audiences, it will change you too." Sandra sat in silence after the call, staring at the sunlight spilling across her living room floor. She felt the beginning of something new, something powerful, something deeply human. But she also felt the shadows of fear, because every new beginning carries with it the weight of old ghosts. And she knew the shadow of the Matrix would follow her into this new chapter. The question was no longer what if she had said yes all those years ago. The question now was, what would she do with the yes she had just given? The days leading up to the first table read of the new film felt heavy for Sandra. She had agreed to the role, but now reality was pressing closer. Scripts lay open on her kitchen table, pages filled with strange symbols and layered dialogue. The story was not easy. It bent time. It blurred the line between truth and illusion. It asked questions that had no clear answers. And yet that was what drew her. She wanted to face what she had once avoided. She wanted to prove to herself that she could walk into the unknown and not turn away. On the morning of the table read, Sandra arrived at a small rehearsal space in downtown Los Angeles. There were no flashing lights, no cameras, just a plain room with long tables, paper cups of coffee, and a group of nervous actors flipping through their scripts. As she walked in, the room grew quieter. People respected her. They admired her career, but they also wondered why she had chosen such a difficult project. Sandra felt their eyes on her, but she did not let it shake her. She reminded herself, humility is strength. She sat down, placed the script in front of her, and smiled softly at the others. When the reading began, the words felt heavy in her mouth. Her character was layered with contradictions, strong yet fragile, hopeful yet burdened by despair. At first, Sandra stumbled. Her voice faltered, the rhythm broke. She felt her cheeks burn with shame. The younger actors looked at her with wide eyes, unsure how to react. She wanted to leave, to run away like she had years ago when she first held the Matrix script in her hands. But then she remembered the young actress who had told her that her roles gave her courage. Sandra thought, if I quit now, what lesson do I leave behind? She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and kept reading. Something began to shift. The more she leaned into her character's fragility, the more real it became. The director watched closely, nodding. He saw not perfection, but truth, and truth was what he wanted. By the time the reading ended, the room was filled with a strange silence. Not the silence of doubt, but the silence that comes when people are moved. One of the actors whispered, "That was powerful." Sandra looked down at her trembling hands, tears gathering in her eyes. She had not been perfect, but she had been honest, and maybe honesty was enough. Afterward, the director pulled her aside. He spoke with calm sincerity. "Sandra, I know you carry the weight of that old choice, but I want you to see this not as a correction of the past, but as a new path. You are not here to prove what you missed. You are here to discover something new inside yourself." His words settled deep in her heart. She realized this journey was not about regret anymore. It was about resilience. It was about saying yes to the present moment even when it frightened her. But challenges were only beginning. In the weeks that followed, the rehearsals grew more intense. The script demanded long hours of emotional digging. Her character faced betrayal, isolation, and the temptation to surrender to illusions. Sandra found herself carrying those emotions home with her. She dreamed of worlds collapsing, of voices calling her name, of doors slamming shut. Some mornings she woke with tears on her cheeks, unsure if they belonged to her or to the woman she was portraying. Acting had always been a craft for her, but this role was becoming a mirror. It was showing her the parts of herself she had long buried. The fears, the doubts, the quiet strength she had never fully trusted. During one particularly difficult rehearsal, she broke down. The scene called for her to confront a friend who had betrayed her. The words on the page cut too close to her own memories of people she had once trusted and lost. Her voice cracked, her hands shook. She wanted to stop, but the director raised his hand and said gently, "Don't stop, let it break you." So she did. She let her voice collapse, let her body tremble, let her tears fall openly. When the scene ended, the room was drenched in silence. And then slowly the others began to clap. It was not the applause of admiration, but of gratitude. They had witnessed something raw, something true. Sandra bowed her head, whispering to herself, "This is why I am here." Still, doubt returned each night when she was alone. The shadow of the Matrix still lingered in her mind. She wondered if audiences would see her as someone chasing what she had missed, instead of creating something new. She feared whispers of comparison, headlines that would reduce her journey to regret. Yet each morning she chose to return. Each morning she said to herself, "This is not about them. This is about me." And with every day she grew stronger, not in pride, but in humility. She learned to carry fear without letting it crush her. And then, something unexpected happened again. One evening, Keanu Reeves called her. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I heard about the project," he said. "I just wanted to tell you, I think it's brave." "Not because of the role, but because you are facing something you once turned away from. That takes strength." Sandra's throat tightened. She whispered, "I'm terrified, Keanu." He replied softly, "Good. That means it matters." His words sank deep into her soul. It was as if life itself had spoken through him, reminding her that fear is not the enemy. Fear is the sign that we are standing on the edge of growth. That night, Sandra stood at her window again, looking at her reflection in the glass. Years ago, she had seen regret staring back at her, but now she saw resilience. She saw a woman who had been brave enough to say no when it did not feel right, and brave enough to say yes when it mattered most. The Matrix belonged to the past. But this story, this journey, belonged to her future. And as the city lights flickered in the distance, she knew she was only at the beginning. The real test was still waiting, hidden in the shadows of the days to come. The first day on set arrived with a weight that Sandra could feel deep in her chest. The air was thick with anticipation, not just from her but from everyone around her. The crew moved quickly, adjusting cameras, lights, and microphones. The director walked calmly, his face steady but his eyes sharp. The young actors whispered nervously in the corners, each one silently preparing. And then there was Sandra, standing in front of the mirror in the small dressing room, staring at her own reflection. She whispered to herself, "Do not run this time. Stand and face it." When she stepped onto the set, the world changed. The sound of footsteps echoed. The lights cast long shadows and the air buzzed with energy. The first scene they would film was one of the hardest. Her character had to walk through a collapsing illusion, facing people she loved who were not real. Voices calling her name, hands reaching out to her. It was written to test both the character and the actor. Sandra felt her pulse quicken. Part of her wanted to ask for an easier scene to begin with. But then she remembered the director's words. "You are not here to prove the past. You are here to discover yourself." She nodded quietly and stepped into the frame. As the cameras rolled, she felt the world blur. The voices of the crew faded. The lights no longer felt artificial. Instead, she was inside the story. She walked through the illusion, her eyes wide, her breath trembling. The fake voices called to her, sweet, tempting, painful. She let herself feel it all. The ache of wanting to believe, the strength of choosing truth. Tears burned in her eyes, not because the script demanded them, but because she was living it. She was confronting her own ghosts. When the director called cut, the room stayed silent. No one moved. They had witnessed something raw, something that could not be taught. Slowly, the silence broke into quiet applause. Sandra lowered her head, her body shaking but her heart steady. She had faced the first wall and she had not run. But the challenges grew harder. Day after day, the script demanded pieces of her soul. There were nights when she drove home so exhausted that she barely had the strength to unlock her door. There were mornings when she sat on the edge of her bed, wondering if she had the courage to return. Doubt whispered again, "Maybe you are too late. Maybe this is not for you." But each time she stood up, reminded herself that resilience was built in small choices and chose to return. She learned that courage is not a fire that burns without pause. It is a flame that must be lit again and again. One night after a long shoot, she stayed behind when everyone else left. She walked quietly through the empty set, touching the walls, listening to the silence. She thought of The Matrix again, how she had walked away from that set before it even existed. She wondered if she would have been strong enough back then to survive the weight of it. Maybe she had needed these years of life, these years of love, laughter, loss, to grow into the woman who could stand here now. She whispered into the emptiness, "I was not ready then, but I am ready now." Still, fate had more tests for her. Midway through the shoot, a sudden problem struck. One of the financiers grew nervous. Whispers spread that the film might be shut down due to budget concerns. The crew was shaken. The younger actors looked afraid, and the director struggled to keep calm. Sandra could feel the tension pressing down on everyone. She remembered how many projects in Hollywood had died quietly before reaching the screen. She knew this one could be next. For a moment, fear filled her again. Would this second chance slip away before it even had a chance to breathe? But instead of retreating, she stepped forward. She called a meeting with the team, something she had rarely done in her career. Standing in front of them, she spoke with quiet strength. "I know you are scared," she said softly. "I am too, but we cannot let fear decide for us. We have something special here. It is not about big money or big fame. It is about truth. And if we fight for it together, I believe this story will find its way." Her words steadied the room. People nodded. The director's eyes filled with gratitude. The crew tightened their resolve. They decided to keep going even if it meant sacrifices. Sandra realized then that leadership was not about power. It was about courage wrapped in kindness. As filming continued, her bond with the cast deepened. The young actress who had once told Sandra she gave her courage now became like a younger sister to her. They shared long talks during breaks, speaking of dreams, fears, and the meaning of choices. One night, the young actress said, "Sandra, you could have stayed safe. You did not have to do this film. But because you said yes, I believe I can say yes to my own risks too." Sandra felt tears in her eyes again. She realized this journey was not just healing her. It was inspiring others, and that made every struggle worth it. As the final weeks of filming approached, Sandra felt a storm building inside her. The role had pulled pieces of her heart she had never shown before. She had walked through regret, through fear, through exhaustion. She had found resilience in places she thought were empty. But the greatest test was still waiting. The last scene, the one that would demand everything she had, the one that could either break her or set her free. She sat alone in her dressing room the night before that final shoot. The script lay on the table, the pages worn from her hands. She touched it gently and whispered, "This is the door I could not open years ago. Tomorrow I will open it." Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked fragile. It looked steady, humble, strong. She was no longer the woman haunted by the past. She was the woman ready to walk through it. The morning of the final scene arrived with a silence that felt heavier than any storm. The crew moved carefully, their voices low, as if they all knew something sacred was about to happen. The director stood close to Sandra, his expression calm, but his eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation. She gave him a small nod. She was nervous, yes, but also ready. The years of regret, the weight of missed chances, the nights filled with questions had all led her here. Today, she was not running. Today, she would step through the door she once left closed. The scene was set inside a crumbling world, one last illusion her character had to break free from. The stage was dressed with flickering lights, walls that shook, voices echoing from hidden speakers. In the story, her character faced the choice. to either stay in the false safety of illusions or risk everything by stepping into truth. It mirrored Sandra's own life so closely that it was hard to separate where the character ended and where she began. She took a deep breath, whispered a quiet prayer, and stepped into the set. As the cameras rolled, she let go of control. Her voice shook as she cried out, her hands trembling as she pushed against the illusions that surrounded her. She screamed words of defiance, words that carried not only the script, but her own soul. Her tears fell freely, not for the performance, but for the years she had doubted herself. Every regret she had carried poured out in that moment. The crew forgot they were watching a performance. They saw a woman breaking chains that no one else could see. The director's eyes filled with tears, and even the young actors watching, from the side, held their breath, afraid to interrupt the raw honesty unfolding before them. When the director finally whispered, "Cut," the room stayed frozen. Sandra collapsed to her knees, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Silence filled the space, but it was not empty. It was thick with emotion, with respect, with awe. One by one, the crew began to clap. The sound grew louder until the small room shook with applause. Sandra covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. She had given everything, and in return, she had found something she thought she had lost forever: peace. But peace did not come without shadows. When she left the set that evening, driving home under the soft glow of the city lights, a wave of fear returned. The performance had felt true, but would the world see it the same way? She knew that when the film reached audiences, comparisons to The Matrix would return. Headlines would circle her decision from years ago. She worried they would twist her courage into a story of regret. The doubt whispered again, maybe they will not understand. But then she remembered Keanu's words. If you are terrified, that means it matters. She gripped the steering wheel tighter and whispered to herself, let them say what they will. I know why I did this. The following weeks were filled with editing and production work. Sandra often visited the studio, sitting quietly beside the director as he pieced together the film. Sometimes she could not even recognize herself on screen. The woman she saw was raw, fragile, and fierce all at once. It felt strange, almost frightening, to watch herself stripped of all masks. But it also felt freeing. She realized that honesty, no matter how messy, is more powerful than perfection. She had not given the audience a flawless hero. She had given them a human soul. Yet the outside world began to catch whispers of the project. Rumors spread across magazines and websites. Some praised her for taking risks so late in her career. Others questioned her motives, suggesting she was chasing the ghost of the Matrix. Sandra did not respond. She kept silent, choosing to pour her energy into the film itself. She knew that words in the press would fade, but truth on the screen would last. Still, the noise of speculation followed her everywhere she went, testing her resilience again and again. And then, the day of the first private screening arrived. A small theater had been rented, with only the cast, crew, and a handful of trusted friends invited. Sandra sat in the back row, her hands folded tightly, her heart pounding. As the lights dimmed and the first frame appeared, she felt herself holding her breath. The film unfolded slowly, each scene carrying weight, each moment echoing with the truth they had all poured into it. Sandra watched not just herself, but the story as a whole. She watched how kindness threaded through the darkness, how resilience rose out of despair, how choices shaped destinies. When the final scene came, the scene that had nearly broken her, the theater fell into complete silence. No one moved, no one even breathed. And when the credits rolled, there was a long pause before the applause began. It was not rushed, it was not polite, it was slow, rising like a wave, steady and strong. Sandra felt tears slide down her cheeks. She realized in that moment that no matter what the world would say later, here, in this room, people had been moved. And that was enough. As the lights came on, Keanu approached her quietly. He had been among the few invited. He looked at her, with that same calm gaze that always carried both sorrow and wisdom. He smiled softly and said, "You found your truth, Sandra, and that's all that matters." She did not reply. She only nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. His words wrapped around her like a final reassurance. She had walked through the door she once feared, and she had come out stronger. Yet even as relief filled her, she knew the real test was still to come. The private screening was one thing, but soon the film would reach the world. And the world is not always kind. Whispers of doubt, waves of criticism, voices of praise and condemnation would soon surround her. She braced herself for it, knowing that resilience is not built in silence but in storms. The storm was coming, and this time she was ready to face it. The morning of the public release arrived like a storm she could not stop. Newspapers printed headlines about her decision to take on a role that many called her second chance. Television hosts debated whether the film would redeem her past or sink under the weight of comparison. Social media exploded with opinions before the film even reached theaters. Some voices praised her bravery, others mocked her as desperate. Sandra read none of it. She kept her phone silent, her eyes away from the noise. She knew once the world saw the film, the truth would no longer be hers alone. It would belong to the people, and she had to be ready for that surrender. The premiere was held in a modest theater, not the kind of glittering Hollywood palace lined with flashing cameras. The director wanted it to feel personal, intimate, almost sacred. Still, as Sandra stepped out of the car, photographers swarmed the street, their flashes slicing the night. Voices shouted her name, questions flew at her. Are you trying to replace Trinity? Is this film about regret? Do you wish you had said yes to the Matrix? Sandra did not answer. She smiled gently, walked forward, and reminded herself, humility is strength. She was not here to fight the noise. She was here to honor the story. Inside the theater, the energy was different. The cast sat together, nervous but proud. The young actress beside her squeezed her hand, whispering, "We're here because of you." Sandra's throat tightened. She had thought this journey was about her past, about her own ghosts, but now she saw it was also about giving courage to others. And that thought steadied her heart as the lights dimmed and the film began to play for the world. From the opening scene, the audience leaned forward. The quiet moments, the broken silences, the flashes of kindness amidst chaos. They all drew people in. Sandra could feel the energy shift in the room, as if the audience was breathing with the film. When her character broke down in tears, she heard soft sniffles around her. When her character rose with resilience, she heard gasps of awe. And when the final scene arrived, the scene that had taken everything out of her, the theater fell into complete stillness. Not even a cough, not even a whisper. The screen flickered. The world of the film collapsed, and then the credits rolled. For a long moment, there was silence. Sandra's heart pounded. She could barely breathe. Then the applause began. It started small, then grew louder, stronger, filling the room until it shook the walls. People stood to their feet, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Sandra lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. She had not known what to expect, but this wave of honest human reaction was more than she had dreamed, but the applause was only the beginning. Within hours, reviews began to spread across the world. Critics called her performance raw, vulnerable, transformative. Some wrote that she had given her greatest work yet. Others, of course, still tied it back to the Matrix, asking what might have been. But even those who doubted her choice admitted that the film carried truth. Audiences shared stories of how it made them reflect on their own regrets, their own choices, their own strength. People wrote, "This film reminded me that it's never too late to face the door I once left closed." For Sandra, those words meant more than any award ever could. Still, the storm came with shadows. Not everyone was kind. Some voices mocked her, saying she had only done the film to chase relevance. Others claimed she had tried to rewrite history. Those words stung, of course. But each time doubt tried to sink into her heart, she returned to the memory of the young actress holding her hand, of Keanu saying, "Fear means it matters," of the crew clapping after her final scene. She reminded herself that truth does not need to be defended. It only needs to be lived, and she had lived it. Weeks passed, and the film grew beyond what anyone had expected. It did not become the loud blockbuster that filled every theater, but it spread quietly, powerfully, touching hearts in small ways. People who had once felt invisible wrote letters to her, saying her performance made them believe they could still make choices, still change their paths. Strangers stopped her on the street, not with loud praise, but with quiet gratitude. One woman whispered to her, "Thank you for reminding me that my story is not over." Sandra carried those words with her like treasures. Then came a night she would never forget. She was invited to a special award ceremony, not one of the grand Hollywood shows, but a smaller gathering that honored films for their impact on humanity. She did not expect to win. She simply attended to support the director and the cast. But when her name was called, when they said her performance had been chosen for its honesty and courage, Sandra froze. The applause washed over her as she walked to the stage. Standing at the podium, she felt the weight of years pressing on her. She spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Years ago, I turned down a role because I was afraid. Afraid I did not understand, afraid I was not enough. For a long time, I thought that choice was my mistake. But this film taught me something. It taught me that sometimes the door we close is the same door we are meant to face later when we are ready. I was not ready then. I am ready now, and I want to thank everyone who stood beside me on this journey. You reminded me that regret does not have to be the end. It can be the beginning of resilience." The room stood in applause again. Tears filled her eyes as she stepped down. Not because of the award, but because she had finally spoken her truth out loud. And yet, deep inside, she felt one more unfinished chapter waiting. She had faced the past, she had embraced the present, but there was still something missing. Something the world would not know, but something her heart could not ignore. A quiet question still lingered in the shadows of her soul. What would she say to Carrie-Anne Moss, the woman who had lived the role of Trinity, the woman who had carried what Sandra once left behind? That answer, she knew, was still to come. The night after the award ceremony, Sandra lay awake in her bed staring at the ceiling. Applause still echoed in her ears. Kind words still circled in her mind, but one thought would not let her rest. She had carried this journey for years, from the moment she turned down the Matrix to the moment she stood on stage and spoke of resilience. She had faced regret, fear, and doubt. She had walked through fire and found peace. But one voice was missing. One person's presence still lingered at the edge of her thoughts. Carrie-Anne Moss. Carrie-Anne had carried the role of Trinity with strength and grace. She had become an icon because of it. The truth was simple. If Sandra had said yes back then, Carrie-Anne might not have had that chance. Sandra knew that, and she had always admired her quietly from a distance. But she had never spoken to her about it. She had never said the words that pressed at her heart. Now, after everything, she knew she had to. A week later, Sandra gathered her courage and reached out. She wrote a simple message to Carrie-Anne, honest and humble. "I would like to see you. There are words I should have said long ago." To her surprise, Carrie-Anne responded warmly, "Of course. Let's meet." And so, on a quiet afternoon, they met at a small cafe tucked away from the noise of the city. There were no cameras, no reporters, no fans. Just two women, two paths that had crossed in silence for years, finally facing each other. When Sandra walked in, Carrie-Anne rose to greet her with a soft smile. Her eyes carried kindness, not judgment. They embraced gently, and for a moment, words were not needed. Then they sat down, and the silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Sandra took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Carrie," she began softly, "I need to tell you something. Years ago, when they offered me the role, I said no. I did not see the vision. I was afraid, and for years I wondered what might have been. But when I watched you, when I saw what you gave to the world as Trinity, I knew it had always been yours. I never told you this, but I admired you deeply. I am grateful you carried that story because you carried it with truth. I could not have given at that time." Her voice cracked, and tears filled her eyes. Carrie Ann reached across the table and placed her hand gently on Sandra's. Her voice was calm, steady, filled with warmth. "Sandra, I have always respected you." I knew the story of the offer, but I never saw it as something between us. I saw it as life choosing what it needed. I took that role, yes, but you built your own path. And your path touched people in ways mine never could. We are not in competition. We are part of the same story, woven together. Without your no, there would have been no yes for me. And for that, I thank you. Sandra's tears spilled over, but they were tears of release, not regret. For the first time in decades, she felt the last piece of the weight lift from her shoulders. They sat together for hours, sharing stories not of fame or regret, but of motherhood, of friendship, of love, of resilience. They laughed, they cried, they remembered the moments that shaped them. It was not about the Matrix anymore. It was about two women who had lived, chosen, and survived. When they finally stood to leave, Carrie Ann hugged her tightly. She whispered, "You were never late, Sandra. You were always right on time." Those words sank deep into Sandra's soul. They felt like the final line of a story she had been writing in silence for years. As she walked out of the cafe, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and soft orange. The world felt quieter, lighter. She thought back to the girl who once sat at a table with a script she did not understand, afraid to take a risk. She thought of the woman who years later picked up another script and said yes, even while trembling. She thought of Keanu's calm words, the young actress's gratitude, the crew's applause, and Carrie Ann's kindness. Each moment was a thread, weaving a tapestry of resilience and grace. For the first time, she no longer asked, "What if?" Instead, she whispered, "This is enough. I am enough." Life had taught her that doors close, but they also open again when we are ready. Regret does not have to be a wound. It can become a teacher, guiding us back to ourselves. Sandra had faced the door she once left closed. And when she opened it, she found not only her own strength, but the kindness of others who stood with her. And so, her story was not about a role she missed. It was about a journey she embraced. It was about resilience, humility, respect, and kindness. It was about the courage to say yes when the heart was finally ready. And that was the story she carried with her. Not regret, but peace.